Good evening. Welcome, friends and colleagues throughout Ireland. It's just so fantastic to know that so many of you are with us this evening as I brought together an incredible panel to discuss the U.S. election and its global impact on LGBTQ plus rights. I woke up this morning here in New York City to hear that Biden is 14 points ahead in the polls. At the same time, I'm very much aware of the fact that it's a difficult time in Ireland where our political leaders and our public health experts are discussing the possibility effectively of a full national lockdown. So we know it's a somber time there, and really thinking of you too there throughout our chat this afternoon. I want to welcome many American guests who are joining us too. It's just so fantastic. It's such an important time. We're, of course, familiar with the events that have unfolded since the Cleveland presidential debate, and it would be wrong to go ahead without acknowledging them. Like many Democrats, including Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, I want to join them in wishing the president, the first lady, and all the people, not just in America and in Ireland, but throughout the globe who've been impacted personally by COVID, and wishing them all a speedy recovery. And I'm sure that that's a view shared by all of our panelists and all of you who are watching us. Having said that, the issues are just so significant that we're about to discuss that they can't be sidelined. And as you know, the election now is less than 1 month away, and many Americans have already voted. I have voted. I posted my vote in there a couple of weeks ago. And it's an election that I hope we will convince many of you in Ireland that you do have an active role to play. Some of you may have a vote. We want you to use it. But if you don't have a vote, you do have a voice. And we believe there is a way in which you can bring that to bear to help this moment in history, one of the most important elections ever, so that you are not bystanders. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But today our message is going to be reinforced by folks who are at the top of their game in terms of the politics of equality. We brought together, with the support of GCN Magazine, this great group of people. And I want to give a shout out right now to Lisa Connell and Katie Donahue, who've helped us so much and are right there in the background with us as we broadcast. We are going to be hearing from our former and beloved president, Mary McAleese, later in the program. You know, she's a great friend and ally of the LGBT community. Evan Wolfson, he's going to join me first up, and he's going to be with us throughout the program. Another great friend, founder of the Freedom to Marry movement here in an organization in the United States. John Holdley, who's decided he had time to step off the campaign trail, even the virtual campaign trail, where he is going to talk to us from Kalamazoo, Michigan. He's a state representative, but he's running for Congress now. And then Christine Quinn, who held the remarkable role as leader of the New York City Council, the first ever woman to be elected to that role, as well as the first gay lesbian person too, and who currently is CEO of a really big organization that helps homeless families here in New York City. As I said, I'm broadcasting from New York City too, where I continue to work with the Biden-Harris folks to get the vote out and to get them into the White House. But before I ask Evan to join us first, I just want to spend a few moments setting the scene, why we're all here and why this matters. Yes, of course, in America, but really throughout the globe. For 4 years now, those who hate or oppress or hurt our LGBT brothers and sisters have acted without fear, knowing that for the first time in decades, the occupant of the Oval Office will turn a blind eye. We've seen LGBT-free towns in Poland. We've seen people disappear in numerous countries, and we've seen lives lost as brutal regimes target them. They've seen, of course, the example of the U.S. administration has set, ruining the careers of our distinguished trans members of the United States Army, Navy, Air Force, with a single tweet. Ignoring and in some cases encouraging legal actions which undermine our rights. And I know that some of our panelists will be speaking about that. And you know, this trickle-down impact I've seen firsthand. I was in Boston a couple of years ago representing Ireland during the St. Patrick's Week, and our a great group of veterans, they were called out vets, were being excluded from walking in the St. Patrick's Day parade, but we raised our voices and we got the support of our consulate, of our Taoiseach, and a lot of others, and they walked with me. So these kinds of things can continue. And we know that on the other hand, we have in Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, two champions on our side. Their immediate commitments are to reverse all of the bans, to end court actions, and to bring in equality legislation in the first 100 days. So this matters here, not just in the United States, but in Ireland and across the globe. And as you listen again to our speakers and be inspired, we want you to take action, not just to be a bystander. Again, if you have a vote, use it. If you don't have a vote, use your voice. We want you to reconnect with your American family and friends, tweet, WhatsApp, text, and encourage them to vote. Tell them why this matters so much to you and why it matters in relation to LGBTQ rights throughout the globe. Okay, our first guest and my great friend, Evan Wolfson, a wonderful ally to all of us in Ireland, known by many as the godfather and the architect of the same-sex marriage movement here. As I said, he's the founder of the Freedom to Marry organization. He's been providing strategic support to so many other countries across the globe. And I remember well the day many, many years ago when he met Anne-Louise and I in a diner for breakfast one morning, just before we started our own case to get our lifelong partnership recognized in the Irish courts, meeting us, offering us advice, and coming back and forth then to Ireland, his friends and colleagues, working with the Yes Equality campaign in that last year, making such a significant difference. Evan, I want to welcome you onto the program.
Thank you. Wonderful to be with you.
Yeah, great. And also to say, Evan, it was a great support in helping me get together a couple of our other American guests too. Evan, do you want to just say a couple of maybe things, again, anything more to say about yourself, the importance of this election before we turn to John?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me join you in sending good words to my Irish friends who are dealing with big decisions and big questions today with regard to public health, and hopefully doing it in a more sane and rational way than our leadership here in this country has managed to do. But we all know these are very difficult and almost really surreal times all around the world. So we all have to stay hopeful. We have to stay determined. We have to stay committed to being safe and to protecting others. But as you've said so well, Catherine, to also getting involved and doing what we can to turn things around. And we will turn things around. And it's because I believe that no matter how difficult things are here in our own country, that I really look to this election as an opportunity for us here in the United States to get back on track and to, as Joe Biden says, build back better. I mean, there are many things to be despondent and fearful about, but we also know from our own experience, we know as gay people, we know as Irish people, we know as American people, we know as citizens of the 21st century, that we can make things better. So I really do believe that.
And you are doing that, Evan. You know, even in the recent months, I know you're a member of the committee for the Out for Biden initiative that is a critical part of the Joe Biden campaign. Do you want to say a word about that before we bring John in? Yeah.
Well, I mean, it is true. Certainly, I've tried to get involved and be helpful where I can, but I should be really clear. Tonight, I'm not speaking on behalf of the campaign or in any kind of official
Fair enough.
role.
Exactly.
Exactly.
But you've been an active member.
American.
Exactly. Thank you. Been an active member on these issues and raising the voice of LGBTQ plus rights throughout the last period of time.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and you had said, say a word about the election, and I think at least for the United States, as an American, I would say this election is an existential opportunity and challenge for us. There is so much on the ballot right now. I probably don't have to explain that to people in Ireland, but you should know that we feel that here in our country. It's important to understand that Trump was not elected by a majority of the Americans. He's the only president ever to never poll at 50% or higher. He's always polled lower. The majority of Americans have from day one opposed him and have not favored him or certainly what he's done or said.
Yes.
But the system is a creaky one, and there are challenges, and there's foreign interference, and there's efforts at cheating and voter suppression. So we are nervous and have to be doing every single thing we can to make sure that that majority voice of the American people turn out and are heard to repudiate what has been done in our name, but not with our support. And so, and that's even bigger than LGBT. It's bigger than it's bigger than any one thing we may care about. It's really the rule of law and democracy and pluralism and the future of our country and the future of our planet that are on the ballot. And I think the American people understand that.
Thank you, Evan. Okay, we're going to come back to spending more time directly with Evan in questions and answers later on, and he is going to be with us throughout with all of our guests. But it's now time to welcome John Holdley on to our program. As I mentioned earlier, he's there you are in your home in Kalamazoo in Michigan, where you've been a state representative for the past 5 years. And as I've said earlier, you're fighting to take a place in the House of Congress, and we're going to wish you all the best with that fight. You've really been focused on, you're looking for an economy that works for everyone, clearly a social justice and equality campaigner, and amazing focus as well on a cleaner environment. I understand you've told us you've got the friendliest beagle who also lives with you, and you live with your partner Chris there. So John, tell us a little bit about maybe your own campaign, and then walk us through some of the key issues you think in terms of the presidential campaign and its import for LGBTQ plus rights. Welcome.
Well, thank you again for having me. And I'm coming to you not only from, world headquarters of my house in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but a swing state in the presidential election. Because remember, when we look at national polls for this presidential election, the way that the American system works is that we cast those electoral votes by state. 4 years ago, the state of Michigan voted for Trump and President Trump. And so this time around, we see Vice President Joe Biden with a lead. But I've been reminding everybody, take nothing for granted, because there's still many days left before the election, and a lot can happen, as we saw over just the last week. I will also remind everybody, it was but 1 week ago that we were talking about the largest tax scandal that an American president has ever seen, followed by one of the some of the craziest and chaotic debate that's ever happened in the American presidency the next day. It feels like instead of an October surprise, we're going to have an October advent calendar of surprises where every day we open up some new surprise.
I totally agree with that. Yes, exactly. What's
let me tell you about
when you get out of bed. Yes.
Right? Well, let me tell you a little bit about my race and how we fit into all of this.
Yeah.
So, I'm running for a congressional seat in Michigan, Congressional District 6. It is 6 counties in Southwest Michigan that stretches from my area of Kalamazoo, where I currently represent in our state house, our state legislature. It goes over to Lake Michigan, down to the state of Indiana, and just south of Grand Rapids. So it's a pretty big area. And what we know is that it is a purplish district. This is a district that voted for Barack Obama by a large margin in 2008, just barely voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. And President Trump won my district in 2016 with only 51% of the vote. A number of folks decided they would rather vote for third party. So we see this district as one that's in play and a lot of change. I'm running against a member of Congress who has been there for 34 years.
Oh.
I'm 37 years old.
I was going to say, almost exactly your 2 years old.
So, when I was 3, he got elected for the first time. And
time for a change.
It's time for some change. And a lot of the conversations and talking points or programs he's touting might have been relevant 10, 20, 30 years ago, but they're not addressing the crisis that we're seeing now. Right now, I'm running on a platform that's talking a lot about healthcare, because in America, we have a broken healthcare system. This was before COVID-19. I talked to so many people that were taking prescription medication every other day to make 30 pills stretch over 60 days, because prescription medication is expensive in America and it continues to rise. In fact, the guy I'm running against voted against a bill that would have reduced prescription drug prices. And for me, it became very personal when 3 years ago, my partner, Chris, found out that he had a chronic condition. I came home from the legislature one day, and I found him on the bathroom floor, barely able to move.
I'm so sorry.
He had been vomiting for 18 hours. We had a fight about whether we were going to call an ambulance or not, because ambulances are expensive. We got him to the hospital eventually, and they stabilized his condition, and he said, "I'm still seeing double," but they said that's not what you came in for, and so they discharged him from the emergency room.
Oh,
We had to go back the next day, and after test after test, MRIs, lab tests, finally the doctor came in and said, "You have multiple sclerosis."
oh, John.
And my part, and for anyone that's been in a caregiving situation, you know exactly how that feels when you get this incredible news that with questions that feel so big, and you feel so small in what you can do. But a lot of people don't realize that that started then a fight, not just to get Chris the health care he needed to get healthy, but fights with the insurance companies who have more power than our doctors, fights with making sure that we found the right prescription medication and that it's going to be covered every year. If he didn't have health insurance, it would be $7,200 a month. That's wrong. And I'm running against a guy who voted to take away healthcare over 60 times. He voted against protecting people with pre-existing conditions 12 times. He voted against lowering prescription drugs costs. And if he can't change his mind, then change who's making those decisions.
And John, first of all, I'm sure our folks watching, I just want to wish you and your partner really well, and sorry to hear of the incredible challenge that is. So please say that to him.
Absolutely. He's doing great at the moment.
Good. Especially with you as his partner. But it makes me think of, one of the questions I know that I see coming in from some of our folks at home in Ireland, and has to do with the issue around affordable healthcare, and that of course brings us to the impact of the Supreme Court appointment. Well, for that, Amy Coney Barrett, but also if you could speak a little bit about that, but also the impact of her appointment for LGBTQ people as well. What do you see? So
we hear over and over again, and I've said it 1,000 times. Healthcare is on the ballot in America.
Yes.
Because changing one vote in the Supreme Court, as there is a lawsuit that is moving in front of the Supreme Court right now, could determine whether the protections under the Affordable Care Act exist by the end of the year or not. And what that means is that she could be hearing, as someone who has been known to be hostile to these types of programs, she could be deciding whether the entire Affordable Care Act is repealed or not. And if that was to be the case, then it would go to Congress, and we have to see, can we pass healthcare that would then re-protect folks? And can we get that bill through the House and the Senate? The guy I'm running against has already shown us over and over he's going to vote no. So that's why we need to put new people in the place. That's why Joe Biden's leadership on this is really important as well, because he will make appointments to the Supreme Court moving forward. And so many of the protections that LGBTQ people have in America right now are in place because of 1 or 2 votes on the Supreme Court. If there was folks hostile to equality on the Supreme Court and they reversed by 1 vote the marriage equality decision, we would lose marriage equality in a state like Michigan because it has not been codified at the local level, at the state level. Same thing with many of our non-discrimination protections. We had a 6-3 decision recently, and that was great news. But the next set of appointments could reverse that. Unless we can put a pro-equality Congress, Senate, and president in place, like Joe Biden, to actually then move these things forward. So yeah, there's a lot on the line right now.
Okay, thank you. And John, if I might ask you just another question coming in, in terms of the surprises that you're talking about, do you think that as the days, as we wake up each morning and the things that are unfolding, do you think that this is changing hearts and minds to move people to vote for the Biden-Harris ticket, or in fact just deepening the Trump support base?
I'll tell you what I'm hearing when we
Yes,
talk to folks at the doors, when we talk to folks on the phone or text. The reality is that there is over and over, we're seeing people shift towards this deep need for leadership that believes in science, calm, measured leadership that shares our American values, that wants to heal the soul of our nation, that wants to bring us back together. And so what I keep seeing is a steady trend of people shaking their head and saying, I can't do this division anymore. And I'll tell you, that means folks who have never voted for a Democrat like myself, they're talking to us on the phone or via text in droves saying, this is the year that I have to say, we need a complete change. And there is no amount of distraction with a 24-hour news cycle. There's no amount of distraction with yet another October surprise that will ever take away the fact that there are people whose loved ones will not be there for Thanksgiving or Christmas because we've lost them to COVID-19. Or the mom trying to deal with their kids, a kindergartner in virtual school because they can't go back to their schools because of COVID-19. And there is no amount of distraction that is changing those minds. They're focused on voting for change. They're focused on voting for unity. And we're seeing right now, even in my congressional district, 1 out of 6 people who have the ballot has never voted before. So their new voters are coming out in droves.
Actually, Catherine,
sorry, Evan, go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to jump in and underscore what John represents here, which is that important as it is that we elect a different president, because presidents pick the Supreme Court, presidents send messages that can undermine science, take action, et cetera, et cetera. We could go right through the whole list. But John represents the fact that it's not just about the presidency, it's up and down the ballot. We need better people in Congress. If the senators were a different, if the US Senate was a different composition, Trump would not have been able to do the damage he has done to our country, to our public health, to our economy, to our standing in the world, et cetera. Evil and difficult as their set of tools are in the presidency, it also required the acquiescence of the Republicans in Congress and in the Senate to make this happen. State legislatures, state governors, et cetera, set policies that affect people's health care, affect people's schooling, affect the determinations about whether people are going to just rationally wear a mask or not. So it's leaders like John at the local level and running for Congress who make a difference and whom we need to turn out the vote for, just as we do when it comes to the presidency and the Senate and the House of Representatives.
Thank you, Evan. And so if I might say, just as we're encouraging our Irish people to phone their American friends and family in relation to the presidential election, if they happen to know of anyone in Michigan, just exactly your family and friends there too, if you've listened to this debate. It's so critical, as you say, really, as they say here too, when you're voting, and people know that I am Democrat, that that we vote up and down blue. We vote up and down the election card blue. So, John, again, other questions coming in. I'm going to put one to you, but just to say, too, even having been back in the States for the last couple of months now, the way you describe what's going on really on the ground in relation to your people. The people that you represent, and all types of people, as well as those who share our sexual identity. It's so disturbing, but it's very profound and deeply emotional, I feel, listening to what you've described. So I'm grateful that our people in Ireland can hear that. We know Biden has some, if I might ask, just in contrast to what has happened under the Trump administration, some plans that some of for LGBTQ plus people that you might want to mention a couple for our people to hear. Could you please? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll start, and I'm sure that Evan can also add to this, because the reality is there's such a stark difference between the attacks on LGBTQ people under the Trump administration and such a long-standing ally for equality issues with Vice President Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden was talking about marriage equality before marriage equality was cool. He was fighting in his private life to also work on anti-bullying and anti-discrimination initiatives.
Yes.
And when you start going down the major list, anything from major policy decisions that'll be regarding the Supreme Court justice appointments to things like strengthening rules and administrative decisions, protecting non-discrimination language in bills that already exist, healthcare. How are we going to be approaching other sort of regulatory issues that move forward to, I'm thinking about Section 1557 in the Affordable Care Act to make sure that we don't have discrimination in our healthcare, to making sure that just even lifting up or honoring LGBTQ families that have been so easy to discriminate against because of license to discriminate laws that currently exist in so many states. Vice President Joe Biden has said not only is he not going to stand for discrimination, but he's going to stand up for equality. LGBTQ voters are front and center in his campaign. And I think that that's exactly that type of leadership that we need to see, not just that we're going to prevent bad things from happening, but he's going to champion that good things happen too.
Very good. Thank you. Evan, did you want to put anything to John or in terms of a question?
No, I think John put it really well. You could give a couple other examples. There's a bill that's been pending in Congress to make explicit federal civil rights protections in the areas of the workplace, access to healthcare, housing, et cetera. Biden is a champion of that bill and will sign that bill and work to get it on his desk. Trump and his party are the reasons we don't have it.
Yeah.
And you could go right down to it.
Exactly. Listen, I just got another question coming in from our viewers, John. Given, and this is in relation to Vice President Pence, given his anti-LGBT reputation, how has he pursued that agenda in the last 4 years at the federal level? Or do you want to say anything about our current Vice President?
I mean, the reality is that he has appointed folks who are hostile to the idea of equality. He's worked with them both in front of and behind the scenes. And remember, even if we got a point where a tie vote needed to be cast in the Senate, Vice President Pence is not going to be voting on the side of any equality issues.
Yes.
So it is, and so this is important to why we have to see that change. And I'll note though that attitude has permeated campaigns up and down the ballot from the Republican ticket. I'm right now I'm being subjected to the most homophobic attacks in the country, according to the National LGBTQ Victory Fund. We saw attacks on LGBT candidates across the country that are using the type of discriminatory tropes, stereotypes that exist. And unfortunately, the Republican Party as a whole are fanning those flames. So I think one of the other pieces isn't just a policy decision that's on the line here, but we are having, when Vice President Biden talks about, healing the soul of our nation, we're talking about the cultural and symbolic indicators of what we're going to be doing moving forward. If you think that we really are building towards a more perfect union, if you believe in equal justice under law, then the Republican Party has said that they are doing every one of their actions to move away from those pieces over and over again. And the choice between, at large, the Republicans on the ballot and the Democrats on the ballot could not be more clear.
And I would just add that the majority of the American people are with us. The majority of the American people oppose anti-gay discrimination, oppose anti-trans discrimination. But the minoritarian power represented by the Republican Party at this point and its strategy for suppressing the vote, blocking the vote, and pushing the more anti-majoritarian forces in our country has reached a whole new level. And so, whether it's the appointment of judges, the barriers, the denial of the vote, et cetera, they're doing this to further the aims of a set of the electorate who are a minority and who are the ones who want to turn the country in the wrong direction. And that's why if we get a large enough turnout, I really believe the will of the majority will continue the progress we have made over the last many decades. That is progress not just through the courts and not just through a set of people arguing, but has actually moved the hearts and minds of the American people. We now need to translate that into hands on the levers of power.
Indeed. Thank you, Evan. And again, as so many folks are saying here, it's really in relation to the voting. It's just getting the people out to vote. It's really that's it's at this point for many of us, the issue is not so much who you're voting for, but that you will get out to vote, particularly in light of the various challenges that the administration has put in front of the barriers for our people and those they fear will not be voting for them. Do you want to say anything about that, John? Yeah.
No, I think that this is an important conversation. Every state has different voting laws, so make sure that there's a one-stop shop, iwillvote.com, that is driving people to figure out how they can make their voices heard. What are the legal requirements for their state? And I'll say this though, the progress we're talking about extends just beyond the LGBTQ equality. Yes. America is having important conversations on social justice, on racial justice, civil rights, how we're going to fix a broken immigration system, dealing with environmental racism and the climate crisis as a whole. These are all conversations that are moving forward, but they're going to move forward better when the will of the majority really does get to cast and have their voices heard through their votes. So the work that people can do right now, calling friends and family, sending a personalized email, putting a post up on your social, telling people to go to johnholdley.com, whatever, all of that help us move this conversation forward and mobilize what could very well be a historic level of voting in American history.
John, thank you for that. And you've been eloquent so throughout your whole time with us here. And and especially there, that list is long that you've identified in terms of what are the real challenges and the things that we need to change and how they're consonant really with the overall quest that we have to ensure greater equality and justice for LGBTQ plus people as well. But you've helped us understand how that fits with so many other issues that are central to what's important for Americans right now. So thank you for that. And I want to just thank you for taking the time again, joining us here, wishing you success and all the best, Godspeed, as we say in Ireland. And again, going back to what Evan said there, the importance really of yes, the election and the vote in terms of our president and our vice president, but also within the House of Congress, which John is running for, as well as our Senate, so that we can really begin to turn around the progress that we need in the United States of America and the way that it impacts the rest of the world. So, John, the very best of luck to you, and thank you so much for joining us. And it's great to have Evan, our mutual colleague here, to have the conversation. Thank you, John. God bless. All the best then. Thank you. Okay, great. Wow, what a man. Okay, listen, now we're moving next to another really formidable person here in the United States of America. Her name is Chris Quinn. And she is the president and CEO of WIN, formerly known as Women in Need, which is the largest provider of shelter. There you are, Chris, welcome. Social services and supportive housing for families in New York City. But you're also such a model for so many of us as just being the first woman, the first gay, lesbian person to be elected as leader on the New York City Council, and the ways in which you led all the good fights there when you were there. You're still, as I understand, vice chair of the New York State Democratic Party, and you serve on the Democratic National Committee. So we have a really big player with us here now. And Chris, thank you and welcome. And I know a friend and colleague of Evan's. So please, we're inviting you now to talk to us about your views in relation to the presidential election. And I think that we're doing this in order to really also encourage our folks in Ireland. And I believe you have some roots, if you want to talk about those at all.
Yes.
So we have a friend with us here to encourage them to phone, text, WhatsApp, family and friends, American family and friends, to get out the vote. So please, over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Yes, all four of my grandparents came from Ireland, 3 from County Cork and 1 from Clare. My father and my late uncle spent time there growing up as boys in Skull, very far west Cork, almost at the Mizzen Head. So, but my story of, connection is an American story, because so much of Ireland and so many Irish people have come to New York, have come to the United States, have gone back, have come back. So the idea of people in Ireland reaching out to family is significant. We're talking potentially big numbers of people, and every person you talk to is then going to talk to somebody else on their job or on the other side of their family, or whatever. So we really thank everybody who's tuned in and who is going to follow this. And, when Ireland, there's a lot of just interconnectivity that I think we need to recognize. When Ireland passed marriage equality, when Ireland erased the ban on abortion, everybody would say, Ireland? How's that possible? They're so Catholic. How's that possible? It's possible because the heart and soul of Ireland is one that beats for justice and equality and fair treatment. And when Ireland took those actions, it moved the movement for LGBTQ rights and for choice and reproductive justice forward. So we really are connected. And I was glad Evan is a great connector to be a little bit of a part of the effort to pass marriage equality in Ireland. So I say that because I think we as countries rise and fall together.
Yes.
I'm proud of Vice President Biden for obviously being outspoken on LGBTQ issues, but also being outspoken on the peace process. That's something, we know has not completed its work and its journey, and we need a president who stands up for that. But with all of the progress we've made in places like Ireland and other countries and in the United States, if Donald Trump is reelected, that could all be gone with a wipe of a hand. Other countries are going to say the United States withdrew LGBT rights. The United States Supreme Court overturned this, overturned that. Why, if the United States, which is supposed to be the leader of the free world, starts taking back rights, that puts the whole world at jeopardy. And John, who's a terrific candidate, and now another person on a list I have to give money to. I need to close that list very, very soon. But, his story is an American story, an LGBT family.
Yes.
A partner gets sick. He's an elected official, and he's still worried about not having the insurance for his partner. Right now, we have a president and a vice president who don't care about people. And we need all of you to send a message to your family of how dangerous that is and how much it means to you as Irish citizens and why you need them to take action. And, we've talked about LGBTQ rights. We've talked about the Affordable Care Act. We need to think about things that Joe Biden was the author of the Violence Against Women Act.
Yes.
Domestic violence is a scourge in this country, and I would say in Ireland too.
It sure is, Chris.
Terrible disease. Donald Trump does not care and has not and will not do anything proactive for domestic violence survivors, as opposed to Biden and Harris, who this will be a major issue for them. It speaks to what their life's work has been. You listen right now, and I don't know so much of in the South, but in the North, there have been for decades ongoing struggles with the police up there, with the PSNI. And right now in the United States, we're having more public struggles about the police than we've had in a while, though this issue has been brewing. You saw it or debate or heard when the president wasn't just screaming, clearly different perspectives of how we fix the police community relations or how we just literally bowl people over with bullets and tanks. this is another area where our countries have similarities, and we need the leader of the United States to be one who, yes, is for law and order, as Biden said, of course, but is for law and order and justice,
Yes.
as Vice President Biden said, and that's also on the line here. So I just want to thank you all for organizing this. I want to thank Evan for being, now I'm trying to think of the Yiddish word for the connector. What is that, Evan?
Yenta.
A yenta, for being the
yenta.
ultimate Gaelic yenta, and getting me connected today and in the marriage equality vote a couple of years ago. So thank you, guys.
Oh, Chris, thank you. That was so powerful. And again, with your experience, your history, and also your leadership in the Democratic Party, but also, your very keen eye and looking at what are the political dynamics that are going on in the United States, but also its impact with what's going on in Ireland and then the wider world. That was just so clear. Thank you. And
Thank you.
And your genuine call and belief that our people who are listening and with us this afternoon, this evening in Ireland, can really make a difference once again if they phone their American family and friends or text or WhatsApp them to say to get out the vote. And you laid out all so many critical issues there. Can you tell us a little bit about, because I know we're very keen on this in Ireland, maybe what, if with a change of administration, what would happen for our trans and non-binary communities who've been so deeply impacted by the current administration?
Well, they'll be recognized. They'll be seen. There will be federal resources and more state resources pushed by the federal government to finally put an end to this just rash of murders of transgender women of color across our country. It doesn't seem to ever stop in the United States. I think, we have a legislation pending in the New York City, the New York State Legislature, called a bill called Walking While Trans, right? And you get the sense of that. I think when we have a White House that is supporting the transgender community, it will be easier to pass those bills. We will also see the transgender community be fully embraced by the military and welcomed fully back into those esteemed positions. And then I think we'll also start to see things that I don't necessarily know, but that what an opportunity for the transgender community with the LGBT community to come up and make a more formal offensive list of things. But on the defensive, I think the military will be the first thing that we see.
Absolutely,
and I just wanted to add in one good Irish fact. I have yet another. My mother's mother came from Cork on the Titanic.
Really?
By one account, she was 16. By one account, she was 17. Paperwork, whatever. But she was coming to New York to meet her brother and her cousin. And she was one of the few, maybe only third-class passengers, third-class females to get out alive. And, she had a quote as saying, she didn't talk about the Titanic much, but she said in a book about it, when the other girls dropped to their knees to pray, I took a run for it. So that is what Joe Biden is doing. Yeah. And we all good Irish people and of Irish descent and friends of Ireland need to support him in that run.
Absolutely. That's my view too. But of course, Chris, right now, there are some real political heavyweights from County Cork running Ireland.
I do. Yes.
Our Minister for Foreign Affairs. And, so we've got, and our Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform there. It's a heavy hitters just in the current administration. And just before you go, one or two more questions and to say.
Yes, of course.
I have been, apologies now, some of the questions I've been raising, wasn't sure whether I could mention the names of the questioners, but we had one earlier from Grania Healy, Padraig Corkery, and we have one now from Trish Walsh, and this is what she has to, she said she looks forward to Biden winning on November 3rd. Trump has been responsible for the spread of the COVID virus shamelessly, but also racism and anti-LGBTQ attitudes, which have caused so much pain. If he is ousted, there could be a reduction in these hate crimes, not only in the US, but also in Ireland and Europe. And let me just read one more from another comment coming in from, and then ask you to respond. From Adam Long, known to many of us, great equality champion too. For anyone in doubt about just how viciously anti-LGBT the GOP are, see their platform.
Yeah.
It even contains a nod to so-called gay conversion therapy.
Yep.
So defeating Trump and Pence is clearly the urgent priority, but GOP must be repudiated up and down the ballot. So a couple comments before you go about those things.
Yeah, and the conversion therapy, thank you for mentioning that, was in the platform 4 years ago as well. So this is something they are deeply, deeply committed to, and it's something we know destroys lives, destroys people's psyches, really leaves them traumatized trying to move on in their lives. So getting conversion therapy banned across the country, it's banned in New York State and some other places, is something a president could do.
Yes.
And certainly condemning it is something Biden has done. And I think that's just another, really, Larry pointed out, good example of the dichotomy between the two campaigns there in a big way. And that is conversion therapy. It's no kidding. It really ruins people. And some people, many people never make it back.
Wow.
So it's interesting, the question about anti-LGBT hate and anti-LGBT speech. In the late 90s, I was the executive director of the New York City Gay and Lesbian Anti-Violence Project. And having done that work, we know statistically that when people with an authority, it could be an athlete, it could be an elected official, it could be a TV star, a movie star, when they speak out and say something anti-LGBTQ, violence follows. Because it affirms the hatred people hold in their hearts.
Yes.
And then it's like, well, it's okay to feel this way, so-and-so senator feels this way. So-and-so called Barney Frank, a horrible name. And that compels action, as opposed to if you're hearing positive and you're hearing people condemning hate, that I believe will reduce hate crimes across this country. I have no doubt. And tragically, we're not the only community the president attacks. There are so many more immigrants, et cetera. So I think that will have a benefit for many people.
Exactly. So to point that out, we're just coming to the end of our time with you. I'm going to ask Evan, do you want to have anything else to say or ask Chris before we finish up with her? Evan.
Well, Chris, first of all, I agree with everything you've said, so thank you for that.
Yes.
Not an unusual situation.
Thank God.
You used to be my representative. So, but I think maybe just say a word about the particular challenges in this election, where it's not only, in fact, at this point, it's almost really not about persuasion. All the polls show, as they have throughout this regime, that the American people do not support Trump. But there are tremendous obstacles being put in place in the way of people's ability to vote, voter suppression. There's the pandemic and health concerns. There's the need to vote early. There's mucking around with the post office and so on. Do you want to just say something about that?
Sure.
Exactly.
It's just insanity. Because this is an election, obviously, a lot of people want to vote in, and it's an election where voters are supporting Biden over Trump. So Trump has set out to basically disqualify the process of voting. So he can then, having stacked the Supreme Court, this is just my opinion, bring the case of his election to the Supreme Court, because by all accounts, he's not going to win. This is very dangerous, because the way he speaks about voting by mail, and then says to go and vote again on the day, that's not legal. You don't get to vote twice, but the president is telling people to vote twice, which could disqualify votes. Also, the president's followers are following. So the governor of Texas over the weekend or the end of last week reduced the number of boxes, like mailboxes, drop boxes, you could put your absentee ballots in. To kind of put it in perspective, when I looked at the numbers, it's like the equivalent of having 2 in all of New York City, which is absurd. Absurd.
That helps us to understand, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So what that means is we need to urge each other to come up with a plan for voting. We need to urge each other to check our plan, check our state's rules. I live in New York, but I can't tell you what the rules are in Idaho. So you can confirm the validity of your plan. Once you've come up with a plan, you've confirmed the validity of it, stick to it, and don't listen to anything the president says, and go and vote. And if you're nervous about being in the polls because of COVID, or you're older, or have, pre-existing conditions or whatever, that's okay. There are legally correct and sound ways you can vote by mail, or put your vote in a drop box, or go vote early when there'll be fewer people in the polls. All of that is real. Do not listen to the president. I don't even understand some of what he's talking about. It's so crazy. But you can vote once, and you need to make a plan, validate it, and then go and do it.
Chris, thank you for that. That's so
You're
helpful.
welcome. Thank you, Evan.
For our and the question, Evan, the just for our Irish people tuning in to understand, especially when we hope that they do connect with their American family and friends in relation to the voting issue. You've described that so simply, and it was a great lesson for us. I know your time is precious. You've spent a lot of time with us.
Happy to.
Great Irish American woman and leader, and it does my heart good to know that you're still engaged in that leadership in the Democratic Party, and I do hope that we can meet personally at some point in the near future, and to thank Evan for really helping us get Chris onto the program.
Yeah, thank you,
made
Evan.
A significant contribution.
Oh, well, you're
and
very
I wish
welcome.
you all the best with your work. Thank you.
Take care.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Wow. Okay. So look, here we are. And thanks again, everybody who's joining us, both in Ireland, and I know some folks tuned in here in the United States. Evan, we have a little bit of time together now. Really to maybe take a couple of more questions, but initially I'm going to ask you, before we have our final guest, our former president, Mary McAleese, just ask you, I suppose, if in terms of the conversation so far, maybe if there's any couple of things that we may not have had time to touch on yet that are important for in the election, both what happens throughout America, but also throughout the rest of the world. You, as I mentioned in introducing you to our viewers, you do a lot of work in lots of countries throughout the world, and particularly as advisor on LGBTQ plus rights. So anything you want to just open up this session with?
Well, I think one of the things we didn't talk about as much, but I think probably people watching this will, understand this, is that it's not only important for Americans what happens in the United States and what kind of government we have, because the ways in which our country needs to get back on track, but we do look to the United States to play a role in partnership with countries like Ireland, in partnership with Europe, standing up for the human rights, standing up for the rule of law, standing up for public health, responses to a pandemic. And as we've seen, it makes a big difference who's in the White House, not only for the well-being of Americans, but for the better health of the world, the better health of democracy, the global economy, and so on. So I probably don't have to dwell on that. I think Chris touched on it very well with regard to for example, the Irish peace process. But what is clear is that in Biden, we have a candidate who has long had a commitment to that positive role for the United States in the world, that partnership with countries like Ireland, deep involvement indeed in Ireland, particularly with regard to the peace process, but with regard to standing up to authoritarianism and abuses of human rights. When Biden left the vice presidency and set up a foundation he asked me and others to be part of the advisory team on that foundation. And one of the very limited, I can't remember now if there were 4 or 5 core areas for that foundation that he chose was LGBT rights and
Wow.
human rights,
Yes.
because he really does have a deep commitment to that question. And that more broadly extends to the need to stand up to Russian interference and attempts to undermine the European Union and so on. So
Exactly.
there really is a very clear choice that matters to the world, not just to us as Americans, who's out there.
Yes, well, Evan, actually, and especially what you speak about there, just towards the end of your comments, I remember well, and I was a senator at the time in Ireland. It was under the Obama Biden administration, with the support of Secretary Clinton, that they started to invest more in their embassies worldwide to encourage education and awareness raising for LGBTQ plus people. And I worked with the American Embassy at the time to do some of that work. And even, the resources weren't massive, but that support from the American people, directly from the president and the vice president and the secretary of state, it just made an enormous difference, really, to our work in Ireland. So, yeah.
And it's not just, it isn't even only about America and the United States per se. It really is about those of us who are lucky enough to live in countries that are democratic, that believe in pluralism. However imperfect we may be, we have a set of values that we have to defend that are very much under attack. And, the forces out there in the world who want to cast doubt on democracy, cast doubt on the ability of societies like Ireland or the United States to make a difference and function in order to allow their own plutocratic, oligarchic, authoritarian nihilism to prevail. We have to show that our societies can work, and that requires getting the right people in office, which then in turn requires the rest of us to get out there and do it. And I guess the one other thing I'll just say, in Chris Quinn's wonderful story about her grandmother who didn't just pray, but who took a run for it, who took action. That's what we need to do. And so to the extent people are calling their American friends and American family, you need to encourage them to take action. And the most important action people can take right now is voting. And voting means, unfortunately, because of the complexity and attack on the system, it means, as Chris said, having a plan, figuring out if you can vote early, go vote early. If you need to do it by mail, that in most states that's legitimate and there are ways of doing it, but you need to do it right. Again, better early than late. You don't want it not to count because you got it in too late. You don't want to allow them to play shenanigans with this. So it ought to be a basic, easy thing to go and vote. And there are ways to go and vote, but it takes learning those ways and going and voting. And that's what the calls ought to be encouraging.
Well said again, Evan. And, when you speak about, really what is at heart, has to do with effectively, potentially, not only the values of the democracy here, but also the practice of it. And are we headed in another direction? And I come to see that even more deeply, even just in the last couple of months being here on the ground, analyzing along with all of our people, or the people who are writing books currently to help us. Yes, are we moving towards, as you say, an autocracy, an oligarchy, an authoritarian state, et cetera? So those are the kinds, and to think about for, again, our folks at home, like any of those scary kind of sounding settings of what happens to LGBTQ plus people. Listen, I'm gonna ask you. There's a couple more questions coming in, Evan, and we got 5 more minutes before our former president comes in. A comment or responding to a comment from Alan Edge. Shout out, I'm going to say for me, he's great colleague in Dublin Southwest, great man there, counselor. This election is such a watershed moment for LGBT plus rights globally, with the rise of homophobia in countries such as Poland. The presence of a racist, homophobic would-be despot in the White House can only embolden those who attack us and seek to erode our rights everywhere. And he's thanking our work on the panel. 2 more. Comment from Trish Walsh, Dublin Centre Far Right March last Saturday was as terrible as Poland with its homophobic shouting for hours. They must be banned from marching, or why did we fight for decades to have our rights in law if they are allowed to incite hatred toward us in their marches? Trump encouraged a far right around Europe. And here's one from, I know your great friend, and mine. Grania Healy, Evan, when I met you with Biden in New York City after marriage equality wins, it was evident that Biden was then a huge LGBTI supporter. There has been some fake news about his and Harris's LGBTI support work. Really important to speak up as you are doing, and there's a lot of love for Biden here. Sorry, one more came in and then I'll ask you to come back. Again, Adam Long, Evan is absolutely right. We are looking for a US we can work with to challenge illiberal authoritarianism, and rather than nurturing it as Trump has done. He's been a role model for deeply homophobic figures such as Orban in Hungary and Bolsonaro in Brazil. So those are our pals in Ireland responding. Evan, any comments?
Well, I agree. I agree with all of them, especially my friend Grania, who it's wonderful to hear her name anytime. And yeah, so people should have zero doubt. Biden is committed to LGBT and more broadly to democracy and human rights as any candidate that's ever run for that office. He will be the most pro-LGBT candidate, Kamala Harris as well, that we have ever had in the White House. Anything else is pure disinformation. Look, I'd be the first one to admit no politician, with all due respect, Catherine, no politician is perfect. They don't always get it right. Biden has made mistakes. I've said it to his face. I was his intern in 1976 in the Senate when I was in college, and have disagreed with him sometimes and so on. But I have zero, and I mean zero doubt, that he will be the most pro-LGBT, most pro-human rights American president we have ever had. Kamala Harris right alongside him. She has already a very solid career. Exactly. Senator Harris running for vice president. And even if that weren't true, which it is, the contrast and the choice could not be clearer. No matter how imperfect A may be, if B is monstrous and destructive, you got to go with A. But in this case, you can cheerfully go with A because A is good. Biden-Harris will be very strong, very positive. Don't believe what anything else anybody says. I've devoted my career to this, and I know what I'm talking about. And again, it's not only about LGBT. This election has a lot on the ballot, whether it's healthcare or standing up to a liberal assault, as the listener said, to standing up for climate work and so on. And on all of those, the choice just could not be starker. We need a United States that's pointing in toward the future, not trying to roll back to some regressive past, as Trump has tried to do. So the choice couldn't be clearer, and I can say 100% this is the right choice for people who care about the concerns I think all of us are expressing.
Evan, it's just so fantastic to hear you speak that way. Again, reminds me of all the reasons why over the years I love you and just so appreciated just the way that you do your work. That's so powerful. And thank you for that. I'm going to ask you to help me with, I'm going to do a big drum roll now for our, as I said, former beloved President Mary McAleese, who's going to join us next. I think most people in Ireland know that she's just recently published her memoirs. Here's the story. But just say that to our American guests who are arriving or who are part of our listening in this afternoon. And Mary was our 8th president. She was with us from 1997 as president to 2011. She was the first person from Northern Ireland to hold that role. We all know what a great champion, friend, and ally she is to the LGBTQ plus family in Ireland and throughout the world. And just, one of my most special moments with Mary was a couple of years ago when I marched with her, with my brother Mark, and with her son and his husband, and Martin, her husband, in the Pride Parade at the summer when the Pope was there. Remember that, Mary? Anyhow, and We Are Family was the theme of the Pride Parade. So you're such an extraordinary ally and friend. Welcome to you. There you are.
Hello, how are you all? It's so good to see you, Catherine. We miss you here.
Yeah, thank you. And
we really miss you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. You're doing great work, Mary. You continue to. You just, I didn't mention all the other things. I know you're teaching currently as well. Isn't that right? You started teaching.
Yes, I'm teaching a course on children, religion, and law. in the University of Glasgow, but I'm doing it from my kitchen nowadays rather than in Glasgow. So I'm in a small farm in North Roscommon teaching a course on children, religion and law in Glasgow. Go figure that.
How lucky are
Brilliant.
your students, Mary, is all I can say. Listen, come on, talk to us. Tell us, what do you got to say, add to in terms of the conversation going on here? I know you were keen to join us today. Thank you.
I'm delighted to be able to join you. Absolutely thrilled because, well, first of all, like all Irish people, I have so many roots in America. I have so many of my family who went there historically, who live there today. One of the great tragedies of my life was when my cousin Anne, at age 9, we lived 2 doors from each other. We went to school together. We held hands on the bus going to school at age 5, and then at age 9, they emigrated to Philadelphia, and I can still remember the horror of that. And every time, my parents actually thought about going, but every year another child arrived, and it got more and more difficult. And similarly, over for them in Philadelphia, every year another child arrived, and it got more difficult for them to return. So we all live with those torn immigrant hearts, and the clouds that hung over us, and the efforts that you make to be bonded. And here we are in this generation. I'm still as bonded to Anne today as I was all those years ago. My kids bonded to her kids thanks to social media, and transport and communications. So look, my father's family, my father emigrated at 14 and got his first pair of shoes at the age of 14. Otherwise, up until then, he'd been barefoot. He grew into them when he was 20. And because his father went to the shop and bought them for him without telling my father, and brought them home, wrapped in brown paper and string. And
is this in the book, Mary? Is this in the book?
It's all in the book. It's all in the book. But anyway, look, we have a passion in Ireland for the United States because we have a passion for people, and our people are there, and they've made such a wonderful contribution. And I have to say, I don't know the current president of the United States, but I do know Joe Biden over a long time. He's a darling human being, just as a person. He's just lovely. And he's my kind of person. And I know that Ireland's written on his heart, because he's always been interested in what's going on. And like the administrations that he was, a very strong supporter of over the years, he kept that interest in Ireland. He helped to support our peace process. Anybody who can hear my accent or knows my story will know that I was born and reared in Belfast. I come from a very strong part of the world in Belfast, Ardoyne, which has the highest rate of sectarian killings, bar none. And we lived through all that. We lost our home during that. And for 30 years, we had the conflict. And I know how much we owe to the United States successive administrations, which really put heft and momentum behind our politicians and our people to get them to see the value of compromise. So we have now the Good Friday Agreement since 1998, and it's a process, and we've been growing it steadily, slowly but surely, to try and eliminate sectarianism and conflict. Always aware that we have, two contrasting ambitions. One set of people who want to remain in the United Kingdom, one set who want Ireland to be reunited as it was always historically. So. And it's going to take time to resolve all the historic difficulties, but who helped us to get to the point where we have peace in our streets, and we have an administration that draws in those conflicting ambitions, and the people who hold them, they are all in government together now. Yes. And that was largely thanks to our friends in the United States. Yes. Joe Biden is so up to speed in all this. I mean, if I say, if I have a chat with Joe Biden tomorrow, he'll be so up to speed in all this. He also knows the dangers that are in front of us because, as you know, the United Kingdom has withdrawn from the European Union. Now, here's the thing. Back in 1998, one of the most powerful arguments for the compromise that led to the Good Friday Agreement was the fact that we were all in the European Union, and that had lowered the barriers. It had made the border so porous, and people could go back and forth and live normal, organically normal, spontaneous lives. Wonderful, just miraculous times. And now, of course, the British have withdrawn from that. I have to say that had I known back in 1998 that that was within contemplation, then we would the agreement would have been, I think, written in a different way and would have had different protections in it. But the truth of the matter is it doesn't have those. And that's the problem. It hasn't been road tested against, our Good Friday Agreement hasn't been road tested against Brexit. And so in the next few years, we are, particularly since the British have announced that they are actually going to break the agreement they had with the European Union that protected Northern Ireland and protected the agreement. I mean, I can't believe that that any state, any government, of a self-respecting state would announce that it's going to break an agreement that it freely entered into with its neighbours and helped to construct and announced was a great agreement, but then suddenly they're now going to break it. And in so doing, creating the potential for the slow ramping up of distrust. The thing that we needed most was trust. And the ramping up of distrust is very inimical, I think, to peace, Catherine. And so I'm worried about that. But I'm also, if I was to ask who would I trust to be at our back all through this and to understand what we need and to understand the ins and outs of what is a very complex situation in Ireland. I know Joe Biden understands that absolutely in anatomical detail and graphic detail. He understands it well. So I have great trust in him in that regard, and we're going to need people who really understand that. I have to say that I have been worried by the fact that the Trump administration allies itself very strongly to the current Tory government in Britain. Now, I've taken some comfort from the fact that the newly appointed ambassador from the United States to Ireland has said that that he's keeping an eye on the British government, the plans to break that agreement, and would be worried about it because, of course, America has such a vested interest in our peace process. It has such a great ownership of it. So I know, I know it's written in Joe Biden's heart. I just know it is, and that I trust him is the bottom line in that regard. With regard to the LGBTIQ community, plus community, as you know, well, you just mentioned, I have a gay son, and I have been, now he's 35, but as I keep reminding him, long before he was ever thought of.
Exactly.
Way back, he was born in the...
you were our friend.
20 years earlier, beg your pardon, 10 years earlier, not 20, 10 years earlier, I was involved in setting up the campaign for what eventually became gay rights, but was then so-called homosexual law reform, because God help us, of criminalization of homosexual acts. Can you imagine it? And how that drove people into such dark places in their lives, excluded them, isolated them, frightened them. They were frightened of themselves. They were frightened of their community. They were regarded as pariahs. Some of them even regarded themselves as pariahs because of church teaching or faith system teaching. So we know the cost. And I came at that as, as a heterosexual person who believes absolutely that God created all of humanity. I think of Pope Francis's encyclical this week, Fratelli Tutti. Now, he could have chosen a slightly better title. Might have been slightly more inclusive, but we know he really meant brothers and sisters.
Have you as his advisor,
so,
Mary.
Sorelle e fratelli. We know that brothers and sisters we are all one, created by this one wonderful, loving God, in my view. And he wants a loving humanity. And we haven't always been loving. And we're not on a straight road towards loving, but some of us are trying to straighten the road and move the obstacles. And among the obstacles, that many of us have faced over the years is, sometimes it's the religious right, sometimes it's just people who don't care, sometimes it's bigotry, sometimes it's homophobia, sometimes it's the things like church teaching, which say on the one hand, love them all, but here are words like evil and disorder that we're going to throw at you to try and work out how you're going to love around evil and disordered. So look, I've been a human rights activist growing up as a Belfast Catholic. What else are you going to be? As a woman, I'm a second-class citizen. I was a second-class citizen because I was a Catholic in Northern Ireland. I was a second-class citizen in my church because I was a woman. So, what else am I going to be except a human rights activist? And so I'm so glad that long before, 10 years before my son was born, I was involved in activism on behalf of the gay community. And that by the time he's born, things were already beginning to change a bit. And then we had that wonderful day, Catherine, that wonderful, wonderful day in 2015, when the Irish people were given the dignity of being asked, what's your opinion on same-sex marriage? What's your opinion? And resoundingly, 65% of them, mummies, daddies, grannies, aunties, uncles, cousins, they all came out and backed our gay community and did so with such aplomb. I don't know if you remember the next day, Catherine, that the vote was on the Friday.
Yes.
And on the Saturday, we had voted in North Roscommon, where Martin and I live now.
Yes.
And we were on our way back up to Dublin, not quite knowing what the ultimate result would be, but I was very confident we would win. But then you don't know until the ballots are counted, as you know only too well, into November. But I remember stopping at a petrol station, as we would call a gas station in America, and I was waiting while Martin went in to pay for the gas, and the door of the car opened, and this rather large middle-aged lady literally dragged me out of my seat, and I didn't know, was I going to be battered to death because of how I voted, because I had campaigned.
Exactly.
But then I realized she was crying with joy. Oh. And then her partner, a beautiful, lovely lady, came out, kind of with an absolute elephantine hug around my husband. And they explained to us what it meant to them. 30 years of living in the dark. And now they were in the light. And when I was growing up in the Catholic Church, we always talked about grace, this thing called grace.
Yes.
And I never, ever in my life felt such a grace flood our country as I did that day. Maybe the Good Friday Agreement referendum day, when we all voted for it, was a similar kind of day. But this was, when we voted for the Good Friday Agreement, we were voting for something that would bring peace to everybody. You could say that same-sex marriage was our gift of generosity to people who were going to benefit. We ourselves mightn't directly benefit, though I think we do as a community, because it makes us more loving, caring, tender, compassionate. And I see all those things in Joe Biden. I think of his suffering. He and I come from kind of, very similar backgrounds. I don't know many Irish grannies. I think he's got 8 Irish, grannies and great grannies, hasn't he? And and they came from poverty. I mean, they came from Louth and Mayo. They came from nothing. They dragged themselves up by the bootstraps. He understands that thirst to do well, to want to live an authentic life, to want to shine in your world. He understands what it's like when forces oppress you. And he knows that from Irish history. I mean, we Irish know what it was like when our people couldn't be what they wanted to be, couldn't be who they wanted to be. We're under the thumb, of colonization, of imperial, of elites. All of that, that's part of our history. It's in our DNA and should make us so empathetic, so understanding and compassionate of those who still are excluded by attitudes and laws, which would make them second class and which would make them cower in fear of themselves and who they are. Like, what a waste of talent. We all benefit, I think, Catherine. I really think we benefit when all our talent base is encouraged and helped and nudged to be as great and wonderful as it can be, to show God's creation at its absolute rainbow, starry night, sunshine best, And
Mary.
I think Biden and Kamala, they make me think of that world. They lift my heart. I also lived, may I say, in 2015 during our referendum campaign. It started off for me when I was living in, guess where, Indiana. You might know who the governor was at that time.
Yes.
And at that time, Governor Pence tried to introduce a law, did introduce a law that would have outlawed same-sex marriage in Indiana in perpetuity, forever. Now, he didn't get away with it. I mean, what was wonderful was to see how many cohorts and constituencies just challenged that on the grounds that it was just not good humanly. It wasn't something that lifted your heart.
Yes.
This was not something that was going to open people up to each other and create a wonderful, loving community. It was going to cast people into the darkness. And it was wonderful to see that he wasn't able to do that. Yet he was chosen, of course, as vice president by the current president. So I was there then, and that broke my heart. On the one hand, to see him do that, and then my heart was lifted by the tidal wave of decency that wouldn't let it happen. So for me, I have to say, you know, as a person, I absolutely, well, I've met Joe Biden now, and knowing Joe and knowing what he's suffered and how he has put that suffering, you know, he's put that deep into his heart and made it a kind of a resource that comes out as empathy and compassion. He's got human rights in his DNA, hasn't he?
He sure has, Mary. And you know, there's so many texts coming in now saying it's just extraordinary to listen to your the fire that you have, the love that you have, and as you describe how that's been part of who you are, you know, since you were born and growing up, and how that's shaped you into being the woman that you are today, and putting out that extraordinary yes, really, to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and your own extraordinary history and champion and ally for our community, and the way in which you connect our two countries. As I said, so many people texting in to acknowledge that. May I say, you know, your exceptional eloquence, and how proud, and I know I speak for everyone who's listening, certainly in Ireland, how proud we are when you were head of state, and as you are now, continuing to be so explicit and so in our corner, and so eloquent in raising the various issues that mean the most to us. And I know that Vice President Biden, Senator Harris will deeply appreciate your words in favor of what they stand for and what they want to bring to America, and the way it will impact Ireland, and the way it will influence the wider world. I'm going to just ask Evan, do you want to have a word too, as you're here with me, because we're just coming to our time, but to Mary before we close. Can't hear you.
Well, I think in the United States, we need a president like, sorry, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so great. So in the United States, we need a president like President McAleese, and I think Joe Biden is our best chance for the reasons she said so well. I mean, I think you share the same kind of heart and the same kind of values. And what I appreciate in Joe Biden is he also has, as people know, a very long and deep record of engaging on many, many, many public policy questions in his years in the Senate and in the part of the Obama-Biden administration. And he's built an extraordinary team. So it really is a chance to take the kind of values and the kind of passion that we heard from President McAleese and get them infused into our system in the United States and get our country back on track. The real thing comes down to people voting, and voting early and overcoming obstacles. So to the extent people in Ireland have friends in America who are Americans, we only want Americans doing this, but Americans who can vote, they need to hear from you, and they need to be encouraged to get out and do it, preferably sooner rather than later, and in as thoughtful and strong a way as possible, because then we will get this country back on track, following the lead that people like President McAleese and that Ireland in much of its progress represents, the kind of pathway we need to move forward on.
Such a call to action from all of our panelists, you, Evan, John Holdley, Christine Quinn, and now President McAleese. And so clearly, people who are with us from Ireland, and as I said, I know there's some from the United States too. They do know the importance of this moment. And as you're saying there, Evan, the importance to act. And as Mary has outlined the ways in which she's risen to that occasion in her life, all throughout her life and with her family, to act for justice, to act for equality. Voting is underway in many states, as you all know. Tens of thousands are being cast every day. I'm so proud to say again that I've cast mine for Biden-Harris. So please, as we're ending, and I know Mary, McAleese, and Evan, and all our panelists join me in encouraging you to send a direct message, a Skype, a text, a WhatsApp, or to whoever, you friends and family, American friends and family that you know, and tell them what's at stake. Tell them that we need their support, that we need their vote. So, you may not have a vote, but you have a voice, and use it. And we really appreciate that you've been with us. I want to conclude as well then for a final shout out to GCN for supporting this, and the producers, Lisa Connell, Katie Donahue, Jerry O'Connor. Thanks to everyone. Mary, just so beautiful to see you. And
thanks for asking me.
Thanks to everyone, and stay safe.
Oh, thank you.
Catherine.
Thank you so much.
All the best. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.